A 63-year-old retired school teacher, someone who had spent her entire career sharpening the minds of children, who did the crossword every morning without looking anything up, who prided herself on never needing to write a grocery list because she held it all in her head, started losing words. Not dramatically, not suddenly. Just the occasional name that hovered at the edge of her tongue and refused to come forward. A sentence she would begin and then find herself pausing in the middle of, searching for the word she needed, the word she knew she knew. She called it getting older. She called it stress. She called it a lot of things before her daughter, who visited every Sunday, sat down across from her one afternoon and said quietly and with enormous love that she thought her mother should speak to someone. She went. She sat in an office not unlike this one. Mamantihen Nampehin answered questions, completed a series of exercises that measured her recall, her processing speed, her word retrieval. And then her doctor asked her something she had never once been asked before. He asked her what she drank every morning, what she put into her body in those first 30 minutes after waking, before breakfast, before the day found her. What she told him shifted the entire conversation. What her doctor told her in return is what I'm going to share with you today. Because her story is more common than most people realise, and the drinks she described are probably in your kitchen right now. This was not a rare or complicated situation. It was not the result of an unusual genetic history or an early presentation of a frightening diagnosis. It was a pattern, one that researchers who study brain aging have been quietly documenting for years, one that shows up in the data of large population studies with remarkable consistency, and one that the majority of adults over 60 are entirely unaware of. The reason so few people hear about it has nothing to do with secrecy or medical conspiracy. It has to do with something far more mundane. We do not talk seriously about beverages, we talk about food, we talk about exercise, we talk about sleep. But the liquids we pour into our systems every single morning, the ones we reach for before our brains are even fully awake, the ones wrapped in marketing language that tells us they are vitamins or hydration or energy, those rarely make it into the conversation happening between a patient and a doctor at a routine checkup. And yet the science, examined honestly and without the noise of industry messaging, tells a clear and consistent story. Data from the Framingham Heart Study has shown that people who more frequently consume sugary beverages such as sodas and fruit juices are more likely to have poorer memory, smaller overall brain volumes, and smaller hippocampal volumes, an area of the brain critical for memory. That is not fringe research. That is one of the most respected and long-running cardiovascular and neurological studies in American medical history. And the finding about beverages and brain volume is buried in it, like a detail nobody was supposed to notice. Both sugar and artificially sweetened beverage consumption has been linked to cardiometabolic risk factors, which increase the risk of cerebrovascular disease and dementia. Not one of those drink categories. Both. The drinks that contain sugar and the drinks people switched to because they were told switching away from sugar was the responsible thing to do. If you recognised anything in the description of that retired school teacher, the gradual drift, the small hesitations, the explanation of aging that lets everything else off the hook, that recognition is worth something. Because what comes next explains exactly what was happening and why the morning specifically matters more than any other time of day. To understand why these 3 morning drinks interact with the aging brain the way they do, you need a basic picture of what the brain is doing at the cellular and vascular level after 60, and what it is not doing as efficiently as it once was. Think of the brain's memory infrastructure the way you might think of the wiring in a house that has been standing for 6 or 7 decades. The electrical signals still travel, the lights still come on, but the insulation around certain wires has thinned over time. The connections at certain junctions are not as clean as they were when the house was new, and the whole system has become more sensitive to spikes and surges in the power supply. Those spikes and surges in the context of the brain are delivered through the bloodstream. What you drink sends a direct signal through your vascular system to the vessels supplying blood to your brain tissue. When the brain's blood supply is burdened by repeated surges in blood sugar, by inflammatory compounds, or by vascular stress, day after day, morning after morning, the damage is not catastrophic and immediate. It is cumulative, gradual, almost invisible until it is not. Once fruit has been squeezed and filtered, most of the fibre is gone. What remains is a liquid that delivers sugar quickly into the bloodstream. And from a metabolic perspective, a large glass of fruit juice sits much closer to a sugary, soft drink than to a whole orange. Your body does not know the difference between a label that says pure and a label that says soda. Your bloodstream processes the sugar load without reading the marketing copy. Research has found that sugar has an adverse impact on the hippocampus, a region responsible for memory formation, and appears to short-circuit the brain's ability to generate new neurons or rewire existing pathways, which can significantly affect memory over time. That is the hippocampus. The same structure, whose gradual atrophy is one of the earliest observable markers of Alzheimer's disease. Daily fruit juice drinkers in research studies have shown signs of hippocampal atrophy, a known early marker of Alzheimer's disease. Not soda drinkers, juice drinkers, people making what they believed was the conscientious choice. The woman in the story made that choice every single morning for 11 years. And what the research behind this pattern tells us about timing, about repetition, about the cumulative load on the aging brain's most vulnerable structures, is where this conversation really begins to matter. The first reason early awareness changes everything when it comes to morning beverage habits and memory is biological, and it is specific to the morning hours in a way that most people have never been told. Your brain is not operating at a neutral baseline when you wake up. After a night of sleep, your blood sugar has stabilized. Your cortisol levels are naturally elevated as part of the body's waking mechanism, and the vascular system supplying your brain is particularly responsive and sensitive to what arrives next. When the first thing you send through that system is a concentrated sugar load from a glass of juice, from a sweetened coffee drink loaded with flavored syrup and creamer, from a zero-calorie artificially sweetened drink that confuses your metabolic signaling before the first hour of the day has passed. You are hitting a system at its most impressionable point. The timing's not irrelevant. A higher intake of total sugar or total calories from sugar is associated with increased dementia risk in older adults. But the consistency of daily morning exposure, the repetition of the same vascular insult delivered to a brain that has just spent 8 hours in repair mode and is now being asked to process a sugar surge before breakfast, compounds that risk in ways that single-event exposure does not. Among simple sugars, fructose and sucrose, the types found prominently in juices and sweetened beverages, are associated with higher dementia risk, and these sugars are widely used in commercially available drinks consumed by older adults. And here is the part that the window of early awareness actually opens. The brain, unlike some other organs, retains significant capacity for course correction when the input pattern changes. The damage accumulating from years of morning sugar exposure is not irreversible at the point when most people are sitting in an office being asked to complete a memory assessment. But the window for meaningful change is not unlimited. It narrows every year that the pattern continues. The woman in the story caught hers at 63, not before any signs had appeared, but early enough that her doctor could look at the trajectory of her habits and redirect it. That is the difference between catching a problem in its early architecture and encountering it fully built. And what comes next is where that distinction becomes something you can actually use. The 3 morning drinks most commonly linked to accelerated memory concerns in seniors are not what most people expect. The first is one you likely already understand is high in sugar, but whose specific mechanism of harm for the aging brain is something almost nobody explains clearly. Sugary fruit juice, not soda. Juice. The kind with the word pure or natural, or no added sugar, on the label, which your brain cannot read and your bloodstream does not care about. Research found that the more sugary fruit juice a person drank, the smaller their overall brain volume tended to be, and higher intake was linked with poorer episodic memory, the ability to remember events and personal experiences. Episodic memory is your mental autobiography. It is the faculty that lets you remember what you did last Tuesday, the face you met at a gathering last month, the name of someone you have known for years. When it begins to slip, quietly, gradually, the explanation of simply getting older is available and plausible, and most people accept it. The second drink is one that millions of seniors specifically switch to because they were told it was the safer option. Artificially sweetened diet beverages, 0 calorie, 0 sugar, seemingly responsible. Consuming greater amounts of artificial sweeteners may be linked to faster declines in memory and thinking skills, according to a study published in the journal Neurology, with an effect equivalent to about 1.5 years of extra brain aging. 1.5 years. Not at the end of a long, unhealthy life, but accelerated, compounded, year over year, in exchange for what was supposed to be the smarter choice. The third drink requires a careful explanation, because the research here is genuinely nuanced in a way that deserves honesty. Black coffee, consumed in moderation, appears in research to reduce dementia risk and slow cognitive decline, according to a study of more than 130,000 people. The problem is not coffee. The problem is what an enormous number of people over 60 now put into their coffee every single morning. Flavoured syrups, high-sugar liquid creamers, sweetened coffee additives that transform a neuroprotective morning beverage into a sugar delivery vehicle. The brain benefit disappears. The sugar load does not. I want you to think carefully about this next part, because some of what I have just described may feel uncomfortably familiar. If any of these 3 drinks have been part of your morning routine for years, and if you have experienced any gradual drift in word retrieval, name recall, or the occasional sentence that loses its thread, type the words "not anymore" in the comments, because that phrase is the beginning of something genuinely different. What the woman in the story changed after her appointment was not dramatic. That is the part I want to be careful about, because the advice that follows dramatic discoveries in a doctor's office is often itself dramatic, sweeping, difficult to sustain, more intimidating than effective. What she changed was specific, targeted, grounded in what the research actually shows rather than in the general anxiety that follows a health scare. The first thing she did was replace the morning juice with whole fruit. An orange, a handful of berries. The fibre that the juicing process removes is not a minor ingredient. It is the biological mechanism that slows the absorption of the fruit's natural sugars, preventing the sharp blood glucose spike that hits the brain's vascular supply when juice arrives. Once fruit has been squeezed and filtered, most of the fibre is gone. Put it back by eating the fruit instead of drinking its extracted liquid, and the metabolic profile of what you are consuming shifts dramatically. The sugar is still there, the arrival is different. Consuming less total calories from sugar and lesser intake of fructose and sucrose may reduce the risk of dementia, and replacing juice with whole fruit accomplishes exactly that reduction without eliminating sweetness, pleasure, or the ritual of a morning with something good to eat. The second change she made was replacing the diet soda, the one she had been drinking for over a decade, first thing, sometimes before she had even eaten anything, with water. Plain water with a slice of lemon cut the evening before and left in a glass on the counter. A detail that is so small it sounds almost too simple to matter. Researchers suspect that artificial sweeteners may influence the brain through mechanisms such as neuroinflammation, neurodegeneration, and disruption of the gut-brain axis. Removing that daily source of neuroinflammatory signalling from the first moment of each morning was not a dramatic act. It was a quiet one. Quiet acts repeated with consistency are what the research consistently shows actually move the needle on brain health outcomes in older adults. The reason this first layer of change matters so disproportionately, and why the second layer builds on it in a specific way, is where the biology of the aging brain becomes genuinely instructive. The second layer of change she made, and the one her doctor described as perhaps the more important of the two, had to do with coffee, which she had been drinking her whole adult life and was not about to stop. She did not stop. What she did was look honestly, for the first time, at what she had been adding to it. She had been using a popular flavoured liquid creamer, the kind that comes in a plastic bottle with a pleasant seasonal name, the kind that she had never once thought of as a health concern, because it was associated in her mind with a small, harmless pleasure. She read the label one morning, the sugar content per serving, and the serving size listed was smaller than what she was actually pouring, was the equivalent of adding a small dessert to her first beverage of the day, every day, before 8 in the morning. She switched to black coffee, or coffee with a small amount of real milk. Researchers found that higher coffee intake was associated with slower decline in attention, executive function, and an overall composite score of cognitive functions. The coffee itself, consumed without the sugar load she had been adding to it, could now function the way the research suggested it might. Caffeine has been shown to have neuroprotective properties, including the reduction of amyloid beta production, a key pathological hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. While polyphenols in coffee possess antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties that may contribute to the prevention of neurodegeneration. Those properties were available to her all along. They had simply been buried under the creamer. Beyond coffee, she added water, consistently, deliberately, across the day. Hydration and brain function in seniors are connected through a mechanism that is direct and underappreciated. Mild dehydration, the kind that produces no obvious feeling of thirst, the kind that is common in adults over 60, because the thirst sensation naturally diminishes with age, measurably impairs memory, processing speed and word retrieval. Not catastrophically, noticeably. Enough to look from the outside exactly like the gradual cognitive drift that gets attributed to aging. The difference between those two explanations matters enormously. One requires acceptance, the other requires a glass of water. And what happened at her next appointment, and at the one after that, is the part of this story I most want you to carry with you. You are not the woman in that story who almost missed the window. You are different from her in one important way. You know what she did not know when she was sitting in her kitchen every morning, reaching for what she believed was the reasonable, responsible, healthy choice. You have that knowledge now, and knowledge at this stage is not a small thing. The concern with these beverages is not that one glass triggers sudden memory loss, but that repeated exposure adds weight to a long list of lifestyle factors, nudging the brain in the wrong direction. No single drink decides your brain's fate. Risk builds from a web of habits and conditions. Blood pressure, exercise, diet quality, social connection, and sleep, among others. You are not being asked to overhaul your life. You are being asked to look honestly at 3 things you likely consume before most of your day has even begun, and to consider whether any of them have been working quietly against the most important organ you have. That is not a frightening question. It is an empowering one. The woman whose story opened this conversation went back for her follow-up assessment 14 months after that appointment. Her word retrieval had improved. Her doctor noted it. She noted it. Her daughter noticed it first, actually, the way daughters often do. Sitting across from her one Sunday, realizing the conversation felt different, felt easier, felt more like the conversations they used to have. There is no guarantee in this science. I want to be honest about that. There is no single dietary change that reverses years of accumulated biological stress on the aging brain in one clean motion. What there is, and what the research consistently demonstrates, is that the brain of a person over 60 retains meaningful capacity for improvement when the inputs change. One practical approach to reducing dementia risk is limiting or eliminating sugary beverages. Research has found a direct link between sugary beverages and increased risk of Alzheimer's. That is not a complicated action. It does not require a prescription or a referral. It requires the kind of honest attention to something ordinary that most of us have never applied to the liquids we pour before breakfast. I am Dr. Stephen Cladwell. I share stories like this because the people behind them are real, and because you are real, sitting wherever you are, with your own morning ritual and your own quiet assumptions about what is harmless. Your health genuinely matters. Share this with someone who may be where that school teacher was, before the appointment, before anyone asked what was in her glass, before she knew what you now know. You could be the reason they find out in time. Stay with us. There is more I want to bring you.